This is a work of pure cinematic fiction created solely for entertainment purposes. All characters, locations, organizations, and events are entirely fictional. I need you to leave. You are ruining this trip for everyone. Vanessa Carter said it without lowering her voice. She said it standing in the middle of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, surrounded by rolling luggage and strangers and their two children, who were 11 and 14 years old and old enough to understand exactly what their mother had just said to their father. She did not whisper it. She did not pull him aside. She stood in the departures terminal with her carry-on bag hanging from one manicured hand and her eyes flat and certain, and she told Miles Carter, her husband of 17 years, the man who had spent 4 months planning this trip, the man who had paid for every single ticket, that he needed to go. If you have ever felt your chest go hollow in a public place, if you have ever felt the world get very loud and very quiet at the same time, then you already know what Miles felt in that moment. But here's what Vanessa did not know. She did not know that Miles had spent the last 3 days taking his life apart piece by piece, turning over every stone, reading every message, following every financial thread, and that what he had found had changed everything. She thought she was standing at the starting line. She had no idea the race was already over. But before we go any further, if this story already has your attention, please take 1 second to hit that like button and subscribe to this channel so you don't miss a single chapter. Drop a comment and tell me what city or country you're watching from. It means more than you know to see how far these stories travel. Now let's get back to Miles. Miles Carter had a rule he lived by, one he'd picked up from his father, and his father's father before that, both of whom had worked in construction before Miles turned it into a company. The rule was simple. You don't build on ground you haven't tested. You pour concrete where you've checked the soil. You raise walls where the foundation is true. It sounds like a practical thing, a contractor's thing, but Miles had applied it to everything. His friendships, his finances, his marriage. He believed you could tell what something was made of if you paid attention long enough. He had stopped paying attention somewhere around year 12. He knew that now. He was 43 years old, broad across the shoulders, with a face that had been called serious by people who didn't know him and called trustworthy by people who did. He had built Carter Construction from a 3-man crew working weekend renovation jobs into a regional firm with 42 employees and contracts across the Atlanta metro area. He was not a flashy man. He did not own unnecessary things. But when he decided to do something right, he did it completely. And the World Cup trip had been, by any measure, the most thorough thing he'd done for his family in years. 4 months of planning. That was not an exaggeration. He had started in February, right after the draw, when he'd stayed up past midnight researching which group stage matches would be played in Atlanta, which stadium tours were available, which hotels were within walking distance of the fan zones. He had booked the flights himself, seats 14A through 14D, window and aisle on both sides so the kids could each have a view. He had reserved a suite at the Omni, the good one, with 2 bathrooms, because Danny was 14 and needed privacy in the mornings, and nobody needed that argument on vacation. He had gotten tickets to not 1, but 2 matches, including the anniversary dinner reservation at the rooftop restaurant Vanessa had mentioned once, 8 months ago, in passing, when they were watching a travel show, and he had written it down in his phone because that was the kind of husband he tried to be. He had not told anyone he was planning any of this. That was also his style. Miles Carter did not announce. He delivered. By late May, he had everything locked in. Flights, hotel, stadium tour, match tickets, dinner reservation. He'd put together a folder, actual printed pages because his mother had raised him to have something on paper, with all the confirmation numbers and addresses and a rough daily schedule. He'd put the folder in the kitchen drawer where they kept takeout menus and important things, and he'd shown Vanessa at dinner one Thursday night in early June. She had looked at it, flipped through the pages, said, "This looks nice, Miles," and gone back to her phone. He had told himself she was tired. She worked long hours at the property management firm where she was a senior leasing coordinator, dealing with difficult tenants and more difficult landlords. He knew the job wore her down. He gave her the benefit of the doubt because that was what marriage was, at least as far as he understood it, the steady, daily choosing to believe the best explanation over the worst one. He had been choosing the best explanation for a long time. The trouble started 3 days before the trip, not the visible trouble that had started long before, as he would come to understand, But the moment Miles Carter's eyes opened to what was actually happening in his house, in his bank accounts, in his marriage, that started on a Tuesday morning, 9 days into June, when he went looking for the business debit card and found something else instead. He used a small home office off the hallway. Nothing fancy, just a desk and a file cabinet and a second-hand bookshelf. He kept the company's supplemental checking account card in the second drawer of the desk, clipped to the account book. When he opened the drawer that Tuesday, the card was there. But underneath it was a piece of paper he didn't recognize. A printed bank statement, folded in thirds. It wasn't his account. The account number was different. The name on the statement was Vanessa L. Carter. But the bank was not the bank where they kept their joint checking, or the savings account they'd opened when Danny was born. It was a bank Miles had never heard of, and the statement showed a balance of $31,412. He stood at his desk for a long moment. The house was quiet. It was 7:15 in the morning. Vanessa had already left for work. Jordan, their 11-year-old, was still asleep. Danny was in the bathroom down the hall, running water. Miles put the statement down on the desk, sat in his chair, and stared at the wall. Then he started thinking. He was not a suspicious man by nature. He was methodical, and there is a difference. A suspicious man looks for problems. A methodical man follows evidence where it leads. Miles did not immediately assume the worst. He told himself there could be an explanation, an old account she'd forgotten to mention, a savings thing she'd set up quietly, maybe for the kids' college fund. He had a dozen explanations, and he held all of them at once, turning them like rocks, looking at the undersides. Then he opened his laptop and logged into the business account. Carter Construction maintained a corporate checking account for payroll, subcontractor payments, materials, and operating costs. Miles reviewed it every Friday morning. He had not reviewed it yet this week. When he opened the statement summary for the last 90 days, he found 6 transfers he did not recognize. 4 were for $4,000 each. 2 were for $3,500. The total came to $23,000, moved in amounts small enough to avoid automatic flagging, spread across 11 weeks. The transfers listed a destination account. He checked the routing and account number against the statement he'd found in the drawer. They matched. Miles closed the laptop. He sat back in his chair. He breathed through his nose slowly, the way his doctor had told him to when his blood pressure ran high. Outside the window, a neighbor's sprinkler was running. A bird was doing something loud and cheerful in the magnolia tree. The world was completely normal in every direction except the one that mattered. He did not cry. He did not swear. He picked up his phone, opened his banking app, and began making screenshots. Then he opened his calendar, looked at the 3 days he had before the trip, and started making a list. He did not go to his wife. That was the first decision, and it set the shape of everything that followed. Miles understood, and this was a thing he knew from business as much as from life, that when you confront a person before you understand the full situation, you give them the chance to manage what you're allowed to see. He had made that mistake once, early in his career, when he'd confronted a subcontractor about missing materials, and the man had had 3 days to move things around and manufacture paperwork. Miles had learned. You wait. You gather. You know the whole field before you walk onto it. So he waited. He went through his Tuesday with the face he always wore, picked Jordan up from soccer camp at 4, had dinner at the table when Vanessa got home at 6:30. He asked about her day. She said it was fine. He said his was fine too. Wednesday he called his accountant, Marcus Webb, who had done Carter Construction's books for 9 years and was the closest thing Miles had to a business confidant. He didn't tell Marcus everything. He said he was doing an internal audit before the trip and needed transaction records for the last 4 months. Marcus had them to him by noon. The picture that emerged was worse than the first look. The transfers had started 11 weeks ago, not 11 weeks randomly, but 11 weeks and 2 days after Vanessa had told him she was taking on more responsibility at work and would need to use his business card occasionally for shared expenses. He had said, of course. He had given her the card number over the phone, hadn't thought twice about it. $23,000. He sat with that number for a long time. Then he did something he was not proud of, but that he told himself he needed to do. He went into the shared iPad they kept in the kitchen, the one they used for recipes, and the kids used for homework, and that everyone in the house had access to. And he opened the browser history. Vanessa used the iPad more than anyone. The history went back months. Most of it was normal. Recipe searches, news sites, real estate listings she was probably looking at for work. But there were other searches. He found them clustered in the evenings, between 9 and 11 p.m., on nights when she'd told him she had early mornings and gone to bed ahead of him. How long does a divorce take in Georgia? What is separate property versus marital property? Can a spouse claim a share of a private business in divorce? How to document an absent spouse for custody? What makes a spouse legally considered uninvolved in family decisions? He read each one twice. Then he took pictures of the screen with his phone and kept reading. Bam. Wednesday night, after the kids were in bed, Miles drove across town to visit his mother. Dorothy Carter was 71 years old, sharp as a straight edge, and she had never said a word against Vanessa in 17 years of knowing her, which Miles had always appreciated because his mother was not a woman who held her opinions back without reason. Dorothy lived in the same house in Decatur where Miles had grown up, and she made coffee at 8 p.m. like it was a normal thing to do. He didn't plan to tell her much. He told himself he was just visiting. But they were sitting at the kitchen table with their mugs, and she looked at him the way she always had, like she could read a blueprint of his face, and said, "What happened?" He told her about the bank statement. Just that, at first. She didn't look surprised. That was the thing that lodged in his chest like a splinter. She looked like a woman who had been waiting for a specific kind of news. "Mama," he said carefully, "is there something you know that I don't?" She was quiet for a long moment. She turned her mug in a slow circle on the table. "I didn't want to be the one," she said finally. "The one to what?" "About 8 months ago," she said. "I stopped by the house on a Saturday. You were at that job site in Alpharetta. Vanessa didn't know I was coming." She paused. "There was a car in the driveway I didn't recognize. White Lexus SUV." Miles kept his face still. "I knocked. Vanessa came to the door. She looked flustered, is the word. Told me she had a colleague over going over work files. Introduced her. 'Claire,' she said. 'Nice enough looking woman.'" Dorothy picked up her mug and put it back down without drinking. "But the way Vanessa looked at me when she said it, and the way she looked at that woman when she thought I wasn't watching." She shook her head. "I told myself I was reading into it. Old woman, too much imagination. I didn't say anything because I could have been wrong." "Were you wrong?" She looked at him across the table. "No, I don't think I was." He drove home at 10:30, parked in his driveway, and sat in the car for 15 minutes, watching the lights in the upstairs bedroom window. Thursday was the day the children told him things they had apparently decided to keep to themselves. It wasn't planned. He hadn't asked them anything. He picked Jordan up from camp at noon. The camp ended Thursday because of the trip. And on the drive home, Jordan was quiet for a while and then said, from the back seat, "Dad, does Mom have a work friend named Claire?" Miles checked the mirror. "Why do you ask?" Jordan shrugged in that way 11-year-olds do when they're trying to seem casual about something that isn't casual. "She came over sometimes when you were at work. Mom always said it was work stuff." He picked at the strap on his bag. "But one time I came downstairs for water and they were just sitting on the couch. And they weren't doing anything with papers or computers. They were just, He stopped. "Just what?" "I don't know, sitting really close." He said it like it didn't quite make sense to him, which made it worse. "And when they heard me on the stairs, they moved apart kind of fast. I went back up." He looked out the window. "I didn't know if I should say something." Miles kept his eyes on the road. "You did the right thing. You didn't do anything wrong, okay? Is something going on?" "I'm handling it," Miles said. "You don't need to worry about anything." That evening, Danny found him in the office while he was reviewing documents. She stood in the doorway in her soccer warm-up jacket with her arms crossed, which was how she stood when she was working up to something. She was 14 and she looked like Vanessa, but she thought like Miles, and sometimes that combination felt like a gift, and sometimes it felt like a complicated inheritance. "I heard what Jordan told you in the car," she said. He swiveled the chair to face her. "How?" "The windows were down." She came in and sat on the corner of the desk. Not the chair, the desk, which she'd done since she was small because she liked to be at eye level with him when she talked about real things. There's something else from a while ago. Okay. About 3 months ago, Mom was on the phone in her room, and I was in the hallway, and the door wasn't all the way closed. I wasn't trying to listen. She said this firmly, like she needed him to know she wasn't that kind of person. But I heard her say, she pressed her lips together. She said, he won't even know what's happening until everything is already done. She watched his face. I didn't know who she was talking about, but I thought about it later, and I knew it was probably you. Miles was quiet. I'm sorry I didn't say anything, Danny said. Don't apologize for that. He reached over and put his hand briefly on her arm. That's not yours to carry. She looked at the papers on his desk. He didn't cover them. She was 14 and she was going to be fine, and he didn't believe in hiding hard truths from people who were ready to carry them. What are you going to do? She asked. What I always do, he said. I'm going to take care of it. Friday morning, the morning of the trip, Miles Carter was up at 4:30. He showered, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with his phone and his folder and his list. He had 3 days of evidence. He had screenshots and bank statements and photographs and the words his children had told him without knowing the full weight of what they were carrying. He had the look on his mother's face when she described a white Lexus in his driveway on a Saturday when he was 50 miles away. He had not slept more than 4 hours. He did not feel the way he'd expected to feel. Not broken, not furious. He felt like a man who had walked into a room expecting to find his house and found a demolition site instead. The grief was there. It was not small. But underneath it was something else, something steady, the knowledge that he was looking at the truth finally, completely, and that there was a kind of relief in it even when the truth was awful. He got dressed. He woke the kids. He helped Jordan with his bag and checked that Danny had her passport in her own carry-on the way she'd asked to do this year, because 14 means you carry your own things. He loaded the car. He made sure everyone had eaten. Vanessa came downstairs at 6:15 in full travel clothes, her luggage already packed and by the door, packed the night before, he now noticed, without asking for help with any of it. She looked bright, energized actually, the kind of energy that comes from anticipation. He thought about what she was anticipating, and he thought about the $31,000, and he thought about the searches on the iPad, and he thought about he won't even know what's happening until everything is already done. And he said nothing. He drove them to the airport. He unloaded the bags at the curb, handed Jordan his backpack, confirmed Danny had her carry-on. He was calm. He was organized. He did not look at Vanessa with anger. He looked at her the way you look at a situation you have already decided how to handle. But they were in the departures terminal an hour before the flight, bags tagged and boarding passes pulled up on their phones. Miles was checking that Jordan's pass had the right seat number when Vanessa made a sound of irritation and turned on him. You've been weird all morning. He looked up. I'm fine. You're making everything tense. She adjusted the strap on her bag. The kids can feel it. I can feel it. Jordan was pretending to look at something on his phone. Danny was watching. I'm good, Miles said again. You want to get through security? That's what I mean. She gestured at him. That tone. That face. You've been doing this since we got in the car, and I'm not going to spend a week with you like this. She squared her shoulders, and her voice went up a notch. Not screaming, but not low either. Not private. Maybe you should just go home. Take a few days. We'll have a better time without Vanessa. Without all this energy you bring, like everything is a burden. Like you're the only one making any effort. Vanessa. She stopped. Something in his voice, maybe. The stillness of it. Around them, the terminal moved. A gate agent made an announcement 2 doors down. A family with a stroller pushed past. A man in a Nike shirt looked over briefly and then found something else to look at. Danny had gone very still. Jordan had put his phone in his pocket. I need you to leave, Vanessa said, quieter now, but not soft. You are ruining this trip for everyone. Miles looked at her for a long moment. He looked at his children. Jordan was watching his shoes. Danny was watching her father with an expression that was older than 14, an expression that knew something, and he could see in her face that she was bracing for whatever came next, that she had been bracing for it for a long time. He picked up his carry-on. He checked his watch. "Okay," he said. Vanessa blinked. She had clearly expected something different, an argument, pleading, maybe. 17 years had probably taught her what Miles looked like when he was hurting and trying to hold it together, and she had probably expected that. What she got was a man who had already been through the worst of it 3 days ago, alone, at a kitchen table with a bank statement in his hand. A man who had made his decisions and was ready to act on them. "Okay," she said. "You heard me." He adjusted the strap on his bag. He looked at Danny. "I'll talk to you later." He looked at Jordan. "You good?" Jordan nodded, uncertain, reading the room with 11-year-old imprecision and still getting most of it right. Miles nodded back. Then he turned and walked away from the gate, away from the flight he had booked, away from the seats he had chosen and the hotel suite with 2 bathrooms and the stadium tour and the anniversary dinner at the rooftop restaurant that Vanessa had mentioned once and he had written down. He walked toward the exit and he did not look back. Behind him, he heard Vanessa say something to Danny. He couldn't make out the words. And he heard his daughter's response, flat and quiet. "Don't look at me like that, Mom." Miles kept walking. He had 3 calls to make. He had a plan to execute. He had $23,000 that belonged to his company, a hidden account that needed a financial attorney's attention, and a marriage he had spent 3 days watching fall apart in real time, not with grief, not with rage, but with the particular clarity of a man who has tested the ground, found it hollow, and decided what needs to come next. Vanessa thought she had moved first. She had no idea he'd been 2 steps ahead since Tuesday morning. He made the first call before he reached the parking deck. Marcus Webb picked up on the second ring, which was unusual for 8 in the morning, but Marcus was the kind of accountant who treated financial irregularities like personal insults, and had probably been waiting for Miles to circle back since the records request Wednesday. "You looked at everything?" Miles said. "I looked at everything." A pause. "Miles, I want to be careful how I say this, but somebody with access to that account moved money in a very deliberate pattern. Not random, spaced out, always under 5,000, always on days your calendar showed you out of the office." Another pause, longer. "You know who had the card number?" "I know." "Okay." Marcus exhaled. "So what do you want to do?" "I want documentation. Everything. Transfers, dates, account destination, pattern analysis. Can you have that to me by end of day?" "I can have it to you by noon." "Good. And Marcus, I'm going to need the name of a financial forensics attorney. Someone who handles divorce asset cases." The silence on the other end lasted about 3 seconds, which was, for Marcus Webb, the equivalent of a long speech. "I'll send you 2 names," Marcus said. "Both good. One's better if it goes to litigation. Send both." He hung up and walked to his car and sat inside it without starting the engine. The airport was loud, even from the parking structure, planes, announcements, the metallic echo of 1,000 people moving through a building designed for leaving. Miles had always liked airports, actually, the purposefulness of them, everyone going somewhere with a reason. He did not like them today. He started the car. He did not drive home. He drove to his office. Mom. Carter Construction occupied the 2nd floor of a building on Peachtree Industrial that Miles had leased going on 6 years now. Downstairs was a flooring showroom. The woman who owned it, Patrice, waved at him through the glass as he came through the exterior door, and he waved back on autopilot, which was what his face was doing now, running on its own while the rest of him was somewhere else entirely. His office manager, Terrence, was at his desk when Miles came in. Terrence was 28, meticulous, and had a very good read on Miles's moods, which he expressed by either asking questions or finding reasons to be at the other end of the office. He took one look at Miles and found a reason to be at the other end of the office. Miles closed his office door, sat at his desk, and opened the company account on his laptop. He went through the last 4 months transaction by transaction, this time with a legal pad and a pen, writing down every irregular item. It took 2 hours. When he was done, he had 2 pages of notes and a number, $23,400, that he'd confirmed 3 times, because part of him kept hoping it would change. It did not change. He put the pen down and looked at the wall. On it was a photograph from 6 years ago, Miles and his crew at the ribbon cutting for the Northside Community Center, a project he was still proud of, one of the first big public contracts Carter Construction had landed. He was 37 in that picture, grinning with his whole face, the kind of grin that was hard to produce on demand. He looked at that version of himself for a moment, and then he looked away. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to a number he hadn't called in 4 months. His former college roommate, David Park, who had gone into family law and now ran a boutique firm in Buckhead. He and David had done a lot of basketball games and bourbon over the years, and less of both lately, the way friendships calcified when life got heavy and everyone got busy. Miles had not thought about that until this moment, and he filed it away under the category of things he'd gotten wrong that he could actually fix. David answered on the 3rd ring. "Miles, you in town or are you already at the airport?" "Still in town." Something in the 2 words must have landed because David's voice shifted almost immediately. "What's going on?" "I need to talk to somebody off the record, not as a friend, as a lawyer." A beat. "Okay. Can you do that?" "Come in Monday morning. I'll clear the first hour." "I might need more than an hour." "Then come in at 8 and we'll take what we need." A pause. "Miles, are you all right?" It was a simple question. Sincere. David Park was not a man who asked questions he didn't mean, which was one of the reasons Miles had stayed friends with him across 20 years and 2 cities and the general attrition of adult life. "Are you all right?" was a real question. "No," Miles said, "but I'm going to be." He could hear David breathing on the other end. "Monday at 8. I'll be there." He spent the rest of the morning at his desk running numbers. Not the stolen transfers, those were documented now, waiting for Marcus's formal report. He ran the bigger numbers, the business valuation, the real estate. The house was in both names, but Miles had made every mortgage payment from his personal account for 11 years, a fact that would matter later. The investment account they'd opened together, but that he'd funded almost entirely with money from 2 particularly good contract years. The car she drove, a 2022 Audi that he'd paid off in full. The car he drove, a 2019 F-150 with 60,000 miles on it. He wrote it all down, column left, column right. Not with bitterness. He was past that particular feeling by now, or he'd pushed it somewhere lower where it would have to wait, but with the same attention he gave to pre-construction estimates. You had to know what you were working with. You had to know the ground before you built anything on it. His phone buzzed at 12:14. Marcus's documentation. He opened the attachment, scanned the first page, and felt the same hollow thud in his chest he'd felt Tuesday morning. It was cleaner on paper than it had felt in his head, and somehow that made it worse. A table of dates and amounts and account numbers. Patient, systematic, small enough to avoid triggers. Professional, almost. He thought about the search he'd found on the iPad. How to document an absent spouse for custody. He thought about he won't even know what's happening until everything is already done. He thought about his mother's face across the kitchen table, turning her mug, saying she hadn't wanted to be the one. Then he thought about something he hadn't let himself think about directly yet. Claire Morgan. He knew the name. He'd seen it in Vanessa's phone contacts. He wasn't proud of how he knew that. Listed simply as Claire M. He knew she worked at the same property management firm. He'd met her twice, once at a company holiday party 3 years ago, and once briefly at the house when Vanessa had introduced her as a colleague who was stopping by to drop off some work documents. He remembered a tall woman, early 40s, confident in the way of someone who knew she was good-looking and had stopped finding it interesting. He hadn't thought anything of her either time. He thought about her now. He thought about a white Lexus SUV in his driveway on a Saturday. He thought about his 11-year-old son coming down for a glass of water and seeing something that made him quietly go back upstairs and not say anything for months. He opened his laptop and pulled up the property management firm's website. Claire Morgan was listed in the staff directory, Senior Property Acquisitions Consultant. He looked at the photo, professional headshot, coral blazer, the firm smile of someone who knew the camera. He looked for a long moment. Then he closed the tab. It didn't help to look. What he needed wasn't information about who she was. He had enough of that already. What he needed was documentation of what had actually occurred, and for that he needed more than what he had, because what he had was mostly circumstantial, as David Park had told him more than once at various bourbon and basketball evenings. Lost cases. He was thinking about how to get more when his phone rang. It was Danny. He picked up. Hey. Hey. Her voice was careful. We're through security. Mom's in a coffee place. Jordan's with me. You okay? A pause. I don't know. Yeah. Are you okay? He almost said I'm fine, which was what he always said. Which was what he said reflexively, the way some people said, no problem or sounds good. He caught it. I'm working on something. Don't worry about me. You focus on the trip. Dad. A longer pause. The sound of airport noise behind her, a gate announcement, the particular echoing hum of a big terminal. She's been on her phone since you left, like constantly. Okay? She thinks I'm getting food with Jordan. I wanted you to know. Danny, listen to me. He kept his voice even. You are not my spy. That's not your job. You're on a trip and you should be on a trip. You hear me? I know, but Danny. Yeah, okay. She sounded young suddenly, in a way that caught him off guard. 14 and young were not always the same thing with her, but in that moment she sounded like someone who needed her father to tell her what was solid. Are you coming back? To the trip, I mean. Eventually? He thought about the hotel suite with 2 bathrooms, the match tickets, the stadium tour, the anniversary dinner he'd reserved at a restaurant Vanessa had mentioned once. The trip you're going on now, no, he said, but you're going to have a good time, and I'm going to fix some things while you're gone, and when you get back we'll talk properly, all 3 of us, okay? A silence, then, okay. I love you. Love you too. She hung up. He set the phone on the desk and did not pick it up again for 45 minutes. The investigator's name was Ray Okonkwo, and Miles had gotten his name from a contractor he'd worked with 2 years ago who'd used him for a business fraud case. Ray was 50, compact, with the kind of face that gave very little away, and he worked out of a small office in Sandy Springs that looked deliberately unimpressive. Beige carpet, 2 filing cabinets, a desk that had seen better decades. Miles had called him from the car on the way in, explained the minimum, and Ray had fit him in at 2 p.m. What I need, Miles said, sitting across from him, is corroboration. I've got financial documentation. I've got circumstantial evidence of an extramarital relationship. I need something more solid on the second part because I know what's coming and I want to be standing on concrete when it does. Ray nodded slowly, making a note. Duration of marriage? 17 years. Kids? 2, 14 and 11. Business? Construction company. I'm the sole owner. She's been funneling money from the operating account for roughly 11 weeks. I have full documentation of that. Miles put the folder on the desk. This is the financial summary my accountant prepared this morning. Ray took it, flipped through it without reading, just getting a sense of the volume. Put it back on the desk. The other party. Do you have a name? Claire Morgan. She works at the same firm as my wife. Ray wrote it down. What's your timeline? My wife is traveling this week with our kids. She'll be back in 7 days. I'm meeting with my attorney Monday morning. He paused. I need whatever you can develop before the Monday meeting, and whatever else you can get in the next 3 to 4 weeks. Well, what I can do in the next 48 to 72 hours is limited, but not nothing, Ray said. Public records, digital footprint, property records for the other party. The deeper work takes longer. I understand that. Start with what you can get fast. Miles reached into the folder he'd brought and pulled out a single page, the screenshot of the tablet search history he'd photographed, printed out that morning. This was on a shared device in my house. My wife's searches, the ones relevant to the situation. Ray took the page. Read it. His expression didn't change. He had, Miles suspected, seen most things a person could see in this line of work. How long ago were these conducted? The dates are on the screenshot. Earliest one is 9 weeks ago. Latest one is last Tuesday. Ray set the page down on top of the folder. You said she's traveling this week. Correct. Did she travel alone? Miles had not thought about that. He had thought about a great many things in the last 3 days, and it occurred to him now that he had not thought about whether Claire Morgan was also on a trip this week. He didn't know her schedule. He didn't know if Vanessa and Claire had coordinated their time while the husband and children were supposedly occupied on a family vacation. He sat with that thought for a moment. It was not a comfortable thought. I don't know, he said honestly. Ray made another note. I'll check. He got home at 4:30. The house was quiet in the way of a house that normally had 4 people in it. Miles was not a man who minded silence, but there was a difference between chosen quiet and the quiet of an absence, and he moved through the rooms with the particular awareness of someone taking inventory. He stood in the kitchen for a while. The folder with all the trip confirmations was still in the drawer. He'd left it there, hadn't moved it. He pulled it out now and looked at it. The hotel confirmation, the match tickets, the stadium tour booking, the dinner reservation at a restaurant called Elevation, Rooftop, dress code casual upscale, the kind of place you took someone to show them you'd been listening to the small things they said. He put the folder on the counter and went upstairs. In their bedroom, he supposed it was still their bedroom for the moment, he went to the closet. He had not snooped through Vanessa's things beyond what he'd already found, partly from something that remained of respect, and partly from the practical understanding that the most important evidence was never in closets. It was in bank statements and digital records. But he stood in the doorway of her side of the closet and looked. What he noticed was what was missing. Not much. She'd taken what made sense for a week-long trip. But he looked at the space on the top shelf where she kept a small canvas bag she used for weekend travel, and he noticed it was not there. For a regular trip, that bag was what she used. She had taken the rolling suitcase instead. A rolling suitcase for a week. Not unusual. He told himself it wasn't unusual. He told himself a lot of things, and then he went downstairs and made himself eat something because he hadn't eaten since 5 that morning. He was standing at the counter eating leftover rice and chicken from the fridge, not tasting any of it, when his phone buzzed. A text from Ray Okonkwo. FYI. C. Morgan took PTO from work starting today. 3 days. Employer records public. We'll have more by morning. Miles put the phone face down on the counter. He picked up his fork. He finished the rice and chicken. Then he washed the dish, dried it, put it back in the cabinet, and stood at the kitchen window looking at the backyard where his kids had grown up. The basketball hoop Jordan had gotten for his 9th birthday. The garden Danny had tried and abandoned the summer she was 12. The back fence that needed repainting, that had been needing repainting for 2 years, that he kept putting off because there was always something more urgent. He thought about what Ray's text meant. He thought about it very carefully, and without letting himself feel it yet, the way you held a flame close enough to see by without letting it reach anything flammable. He thought, she planned this down to the days. She had planned it so that while the family trip occupied the week, she had 3 days of overlap in the same city, or wherever she was, with her own freedom built in. She had used his family vacation as her cover story. She had used his children as her alibi. She had been so confident in the plan that she'd had a fit of irritation when he didn't make it easy, when he stood in the airport terminal looking quiet and unmoved and wrong for the role she'd assigned him. Miles went to his office and sat at the desk and opened his laptop. He was not going to sleep much tonight. He knew that. But he had things to do with the hours, and work, in his experience, was better than staring at a ceiling. He pulled up every financial record he had for the last 18 months and started building a master document. By Saturday morning, he had something close to a complete picture, and the completeness of it was its own kind of blow. You could absorb a partial truth in pieces. You could tell yourself the gaps might contain better news. When there were no gaps anymore, when every corner of the thing was visible and accounted for, the weight of it was different. It sat differently in the body. He took a shower and made coffee and called his mother at 7 a.m. because she was always up at 6 and would have been waiting anyway. I found out more, he said. How much more? Enough. He paused. The woman from the white Lexus, she took time off work the same week as the trip. 3 days overlapping. He heard his mother breathe out slowly. "Oh, Miles. I know. How are you holding up? And I mean, actually." He thought about how to answer that honestly. He had given this some effort, actual effort, in the shower, trying to locate what he was actually feeling as opposed to what he was doing about it. Because those were not the same thing, and he knew the difference. "I'm not great," he said. "I'm not falling apart, but I'm not great. I keep thinking about the kids. Danny coming downstairs for water and seeing something she didn't have words for. Jordan sitting in the back seat trying to figure out how to say what he saw." He stopped. "I can deal with what was done to me. I don't know how long it's going to take me to deal with what she let them see, what she let them carry." His mother was quiet for a moment. "You're going to be angrier about that than about yourself. That's who you are." "Is that a good thing?" "It's your thing," she said, which was not exactly an answer, but was also the most accurate response available. "What's the next step?" "Attorney on Monday. I'm going to spend today putting the full financial picture together. I want to go in with everything organized." "Do you need anything from me?" "I might need you to be available for the kids when they get back, just to be somewhere they can come, if things get complicated." "I'm always somewhere they can come," she said, in a tone that indicated this had never been a question, and he should not have needed to ask it. "You come too." He almost smiled. "I know, Mama." He spent the rest of Saturday and all of Sunday doing the work. He went through 18 months of bank records. He pulled the mortgage statements and the investment account reports. He built a clean, organized document that Marcus helped him refine via email. Marcus, who had said very little since the initial call, but whose professionalism had been absolute and whose loyalty Miles registered with something like gratitude that he'd have to express later when there was room for it. He called Ray twice. Ray had developed photographs from social media, now deleted posts that had been captured before deletion by the archiving software he used, that showed Vanessa and Claire at a restaurant in Midtown on a Tuesday evening 8 weeks ago, that Vanessa had told Miles was a work dinner, which it may technically have been, except that work dinners did not generally include the kind of proximity captured in the corner of one photo that Ray sent him as a cropped image with a simple text message. This enough for corroboration? It was enough for corroboration. Miles sat with that photo for less than a minute. Then he put the phone in his desk drawer and went back to the financial document. By Sunday evening, he had 47 pages of organized material and a legal pad with 12 pages of notes in his own handwriting. The kind of handwriting that got messy when his thoughts were moving fast, slanted, urgent, certain letters dropped. And he looked at those 12 pages and thought about the man who had filed all of this away over 17 years as the benefit of the doubt. The man who had written down a restaurant name in his phone because his wife mentioned it once. The man who had booked 4 tickets to a World Cup match and spent months getting the details right because he thought that was what love looked like in action. He didn't hate that man. He wasn't ready to be that man again. But he understood him, which was something. His phone lit up on the desk. A text from Danny. "First match tomorrow. Jordan's already asleep. He's excited." He wrote back, "Good. Cheer loud for both of us." 3 dots. Then, "We will. You okay?" He thought about that for a moment. His daughter, 2 time zones or so away, asking him that across a week that had cracked his life down the middle while she was watching soccer in a stadium he'd bought tickets for. "Getting there," he wrote back. "Focus on the match. Love you." "Love you," she sent. Then after a pause, "I think you did the right thing, at the airport." He didn't respond to that because he didn't know what to say to it. He set the phone down and looked at his 47 pages and his 12 pages of notes, and he thought about Monday morning. He was ready. He wasn't whole. He wasn't fine. He was a man who had been quietly taken apart over a period of months by someone who thought he was too occupied, too trusting, or too small to notice. And he had noticed. He had noticed everything, and he had done what he always did, gathered the information, organized the ground, prepared to build. The foundation was tested now. He knew exactly what it was made of, and he knew exactly what came next. This is a work of pure cinematic fiction created solely for entertainment purposes. All characters, locations, organizations, and events are entirely fictional. David Park's office was on the 14th floor of a building on Peachtree Road that had a view of Buckhead. Miles had never particularly cared about until Monday morning, when he sat in the client chair across from his old friend and looked out the window because it was easier than looking at David's face while he laid everything on the table. He put the 47 pages down first, then the legal pad, then Ray's documentation, separate folder, paper-clipped by category, then Marcus's financial forensics summary, which had grown over the weekend to include a professional notation of the transfer pattern and its probable intentionality. David did not touch any of it immediately. He let Miles talk. Miles talked for 22 minutes. He knew because there was a clock on the wall behind David's head, and he watched it without meaning to, the way you watch things that gave you something neutral to fix on when the words you were saying were the hardest words you'd said in a long time. He laid it out in order. Tuesday morning, the bank statement, the business account, his mother, the iPad searches, what Danny heard in the hallway, what Jordan saw from the stairs, Ray Okonkwo's findings, the deleted social media photographs, Claire Morgan's 3 days of PTO timed against the family trip. When he finished, the room was quiet for a moment. David leaned back in his chair. He was a careful man, David Park, precise in the way of someone who had trained himself to be, because his natural instinct was probably to be emotional, and the law had ground that out of him enough to make it useful. He looked at the folders on his desk without touching them. 17 years, he said. 17 years. And the kids are 14 and 11. Yes, but David picked up Marcus's summary. He read the first page, set it down and picked up Ray's folder. He went through 3 pages of that and set it down too. He picked up a pen and turned it in his fingers, which was a habit Miles recognized from college, from late nights studying before exams, the pen turning when David was thinking hard. Okay, David said. Here's where you stand. The financial transfers, $23,400 from a business account you solely own, moved in a documented pattern to a private account in her name. That's misappropriation. It's potentially criminal depending on how we characterize the account access, but more importantly, it's a significant factor in asset division. The fact that she had the card number with your permission complicates the criminal angle, but not the civil one. In Georgia, marital misconduct that results in financial harm to the other party is absolutely relevant in divorce proceedings. Miles nodded. He had done enough reading over the weekend to follow this. The evidence of the affair matters less than people think for asset division in Georgia, David continued, but it matters significantly for custody, specifically her credibility as a witness and the pattern of behavior around the children. The documented searches about framing you as an absent father, that's important. The testimony from your kids, properly handled, that's important. He tapped the legal pad. What Ray has on the relationship itself, the photographs. What's the quality? He described them as clear. Not explicit, but unambiguous. Okay, we'll work with that. David set the pen down. Miles, I want to be straight with you. You have a solid position, genuinely solid. But I also need to tell you that the next few months are going to be the hardest thing you've done, and I've watched you do some hard things. She's going to have her own attorney and her own narrative, and her narrative is probably already in progress. Miles thought about he won't even know what's happening until everything is already done. He thought about the rolling suitcase instead of the weekend bag. He thought about Claire Morgan's 3 days of PTO. I know, he said. That's why I'm here before she knows I'm moving. David looked at him for a moment with something that wasn't quite admiration and wasn't quite sadness, but was somewhere between them. When did you become this disciplined about painful things? I've always been this disciplined, Miles said. I just applied it in the wrong direction for a while. He filed the initial paperwork that same afternoon, Monday, while Vanessa and the children were 4 days into a trip Miles had paid for, and Vanessa was presumably 3 days into whatever she had planned alongside it. He filed quietly, which was possible in Georgia if you knew the right office and arrived before noon. David had a paralegal who handled the administrative piece while Miles sat in a waiting area on the 13th floor, reading nothing and thinking about everything. He did not feel triumphant about it. That was something he needed to be honest with himself about. The stories people told about this kind of moment, the sense of power reclaimed, the satisfaction of moving first. He did not feel any of that. What he felt was the very specific exhaustion of someone who had been holding a structure up by willpower alone and had finally been given permission to set it down. Not relief exactly. More like the moment after you've done something that couldn't be undone, and you finally know what the ground feels like under your feet. He called Ray from the parking garage. "She's been served by end of week," he said. "I need you to keep going on documentation, whatever you've got." "Already working," Ray said. "I'll have an update by Wednesday. And Ray, the kids get back Friday. I don't want anything that involves them directly. No surveillance near them, nothing that puts them in the middle." Understood. Never was going to. Miles hung up and drove to the office. He had a project meeting at 3, a subcontractor review at 4:30, and a structural walkthrough scheduled for Wednesday in Marietta that he'd been putting off for a week and needed to stop putting off. The work had not stopped while his life rearranged itself, and he was grateful for that in a way he hadn't been before. Grateful for the way concrete things required concrete attention, the way a building site cared nothing for your emotional state and demanded your actual eyes and actual judgment regardless. Terrence looked up when he came in, and this time he did not find an excuse to be at the other end of the office. "You okay, boss?" "Getting there," Miles said, which was the same thing he'd told Danny and was becoming, if not exactly true, at least directionally accurate. "You need anything?" "The Marietta file and a cup of whatever's left in that coffee maker." Terrence nodded. "The coffee's been there since 8. It's basically tar." "Perfect," Miles said, and meant it. Ease. Vanessa called Tuesday night. He let it ring 3 times, which was long enough to decide how to answer it. Not whether to answer it, because not answering would change the dynamic in ways he wasn't ready to manage yet, but how. He picked up on the 4th ring. "Hey," she said. Her voice was lighter than it had been at the airport. Vacation voiced, he thought, relaxed. Whatever she had managed to arrange had apparently gone well. "Just checking in." "Okay," he said. A small pause. "The kids are having a great time. Jordan finally figured out how to use the metro by himself, and he's been insufferable about it. Danny got a jersey at one of the fan shops." He was quiet. "Miles." Her tone shifted slightly, not to guilt, not to apology, but to a kind of careful negotiation. The tone of someone who understood they had gone too far but was not prepared to fully acknowledge it yet. "I'm sorry about what I said at the airport. I was stressed." "Okay? That's all you're going to say?" "What do you want me to say, Vanessa?" A longer pause. He could hear the hotel room in the background, the hum of an air conditioner, a faint sound that might have been a television. He thought about Claire Morgan's 3 days of PTO and chose not to think about it any further because the anger was there when he looked at it, and he needed to stay level. "I want you to say something," she said. "You're making me feel like I'm talking to a wall." "I'm listening," he said, which was technically true. "Are you coming to the second match? You could still fly out. There's time." "No." "Miles, come on. The kids want you there." "I'll talk to the kids when they get home Friday." He kept his voice even. "Is there anything else?" Another pause. This one had a different texture, not calculation, or not only calculation, but something that might have been the first edge of uncertainty. He wondered if she could hear something in his voice. He had known her for 19 years, which meant she probably could. He wondered if she was smart enough to know what it meant. "Fine," she said. "I'll talk to you later." "Good night," he said. He put the phone down and sat at his kitchen table in the quiet house and thought about the fact that he had just spoken to his wife of 17 years for what was probably one of the last times as her husband, and the conversation had been about a metro system and a jersey and an apology that was mostly a probe to see how much damage had been done. He thought about what that meant, not about her. He'd been thinking about her for 4 days straight, and he'd found the edges of what thinking could do, but about himself, about what he was going to be on the other side of this. He didn't have an answer. He was okay with not having one yet. Wednesday's walkthrough in Marietta took 4 hours. The project was a mid-size medical office complex, 2 floors, and there was a foundation issue on the east corner that the site supervisor had flagged, and that turned out to be more significant than the initial report suggested. Not structural failure, not yet, but the beginning of settlement in a section where the soil prep had been inadequate. Miles stood in the dirt with his site supervisor, Kenny Briggs, who had worked for Carter Construction for 9 years and was the most reliable human being Miles employed. and they talked about soil, drainage, rebar placement, corrective timelines. It was the best 2 hours of his week. He was not being sarcastic about that. There was something in a problem with a real solution, a problem that responded to the right effort, that could be measured and addressed and corrected, that was deeply, almost physically satisfying when the rest of your life felt like it was operating by different rules. He got mud on his boots. He made 3 decisions and wrote them down. He drove back to the office feeling more like himself than he had since the previous Tuesday. Ray called at 4. "I've got something," Ray said. "Not what I expected." "Tell me." "I've been tracking financial records, public ones, property records, that kind of thing. Claire Morgan purchased a condo 18 months ago. Inman Park. She bought it alone, her name, standard mortgage." A pause. The co-signer on the mortgage application was Vanessa Carter. Miles stopped walking. He was in the Carter construction parking lot, halfway between his truck and the building entrance, and he stopped completely. "Say that again." Vanessa co-signed the mortgage. Her income was listed as supplemental qualifying income. The application was approved 14 months ago, closed 12 months ago. Claire Morgan has been living in a condo that Vanessa helped her qualify for. Another pause. "I've got the document trail. It's clean." Miles stood in the parking lot. A car pulled in 2 spaces down and a woman got out and went inside the flooring showroom, and the door closed behind her and the parking lot was quiet again. He had thought he had the shape of it. He thought he'd found the edges of the thing. $23,000, deleted photos, overlapping PTO, a white Lexus in the driveway. He had thought he understood the architecture of what had been built behind his back. He had not understood it completely. "She co-signed a mortgage for her," he said, 12 months ago. "With income, she was—" He stopped. He did some math in his head, fast and ugly. 12 months ago, the business account transfers hadn't started yet. So Vanessa had listed her own income, her legitimate income from the property management firm. And still, she put her name on a financial document for this woman. Correct. That's... He started a sentence and stopped it. Started another. That's not an affair. That's a whole other life she was building. Ray was quiet for a moment, then, "In my experience, Mr. Carter, the financial piece is always where you find out how serious something really was. People lie with words. Numbers are harder to lie with." Miles thought about a woman who worked in property management co-signing a mortgage for her partner on a condo in Inman Park while her husband's business account funded the gap. He thought about that for a long time. "Get me the full documentation," he said. "Every page. It'll be in your email by 8 tonight." He went inside and sat at his desk and did not look at anything on the screen for 10 minutes. Then he pulled up Marcus's contact and wrote a short email. "Need to talk tomorrow morning, new development, financial." He sent it. Then he forwarded Ray's summary to David Park with a single line. "Call me when you see this." David called within the hour. "Well," David said. "Yeah." This changes the asset narrative considerably. If she used her income, documented on a legal mortgage application, to support a separate household for the other party, while simultaneously redirecting funds from your business to cover personal expenditures, that's a pattern of financial conduct that a judge will find very interesting. He paused. It also raises the question of what she was planning to live on, post-divorce, because it looks like the infrastructure was already being constructed. She was going to take the house, Miles said. She was going to get primary custody, paint me as absent and uninvolved, and she already had a place for them to... He stopped. He had started the sentence thinking it through as he said it, and where it ended was somewhere he hadn't fully articulated yet. She wasn't planning to just leave. She was planning to replace the whole thing, with Claire already set up nearby, with me out of the picture, with my money covering the transition costs. David didn't say anything for a moment. "I don't want to put words in the evidence. I'm not asking you to. I'm saying what it looks like." "It looks like that," David said quietly. "Yes, it does." Thursday morning. Miles woke up at 5, which was an hour earlier than usual, and felt like his body making a decision his mind hadn't finished yet. He made coffee, stood at the kitchen window looking at the backyard again. The basketball hoop, the abandoned garden, the fence that still needed painting, and he thought about the fact that his children were coming home tomorrow and he had to figure out what to say to them. Not about the divorce, not yet, That was a conversation with a specific shape that needed to be handled with David's guidance, and it needed to be handled in person, carefully, in the right sequence. What he needed to figure out was what to say in the regular register, the daily register, the way you talk to your kids when they come home from somewhere and need to be brought back into the normal rhythm of things. He wasn't sure what the normal rhythm was anymore. He was going to have to invent a new one. He was still standing at the window when his phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Danny. "Flight's at 7 a.m. tomorrow. You picking us up?" He picked up the phone. "I'll be there," he wrote back. "Both of you get some sleep." Her response came after a minute. "Dad, is she going to know something happened when she gets home?" He stared at that for a while. His 14-year-old, smart enough to read the timeline, old enough to understand that something was coming, and young enough to still be hoping she was wrong about what it was. "Don't worry about that tonight," he wrote. "That's not yours to carry, okay?" A long pause. Then, "Okay, see you tomorrow." He set the phone down and finished his coffee and went to get dressed. He had a 7 a.m. site visit and a 9 a.m. call with Marcus and a 2 p.m. meeting with Ray, and none of that was going to manage itself. Ray's documentation arrived in full Thursday afternoon, 41 pages, including the mortgage application with Vanessa's signature on page 7, the co-signer income verification, and a title search on the Inman Park condo showing Claire Morgan as sole title holder with a lien from the mortgage company whose application Vanessa had signed. Miles printed all 41 pages, added them to the folder, and drove to David's office unannounced at 4:30. The receptionist, to her credit, simply called back, and David appeared in the hallway 2 minutes later with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled up, looking like a man mid-afternoon who had been in depositions all day and had approximately 12% of his energy remaining. "I know you're slammed," Miles said. 20 minutes. "Come in," David said. He looked at the 41 pages. He read page 7 slowly. He read it again. He set the folder down and leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. "This is significant," David said. "I know. I mean it in the legal sense, which is the sense that matters here. This document establishes a financial entanglement between your wife and the other party that predates the full scope of what we've documented. It establishes intent, pattern, and resource allocation over a period of more than a year." He sat up. "It also, candidly, makes her a difficult witness for herself, because any attorney she has is going to look at this and know we have it, and they're going to know what a judge does with it. What does a judge do with it? Judges are human. They react to the full picture, not just the individual pieces. The full picture here is a spouse who redirected marital resources, co-signed financial instruments for a partner, researched custody strategy, and attempted to frame the other spouse as uninvolved, all while the other spouse was booking World Cup trips and stadium tours." David paused. "I'm not being dramatic. I'm telling you what the picture looks like assembled." Miles thought about 4 months of planning, the folder in the kitchen drawer, the suite with 2 bathrooms because Danny needed privacy in the mornings. "Okay," he said. "The filing has been processed. She'll be served Friday." Miles looked at his hands for a moment. "The kids get in Friday morning." "I know. The timing is... I'm sorry about that. We could have delayed it, but you made the call to move quickly, and I think you were right. Every day of delay was another day for the financial situation to potentially change." David leaned forward. "When the kids are home and settled, and after she's been served, we should have a family session. You, the kids, a family therapist I trust, before it gets adversarial in ways they can see. They need a framework." "Yeah." Miles had been thinking about this. "Yeah, I know." "You've handled this whole thing with more composure than most people I've represented," David said. Not as flattery, as an observation, the way David made observations. "I've seen men in your position come in here throwing things. You came in with 47 pages and a legal pad." "I build things for a living," Miles said. "You don't build things by throwing them." Told. He was at the airport at 6:45 Friday morning, earlier than he needed to be, standing at the arrivals level with his hands in his jacket pockets and the early June heat already building even before 7 a.m. Atlanta in June did not ease into the day. It started hot and elaborated from there. He watched the automatic doors open and close, families coming through, business travelers with their wheels-up posture, already somewhere else in their heads, a group of teenagers with matching tournament shirts, probably soccer, probably just arriving for the same events his family had just been attending. He thought about standing in this same airport 8 days ago on the departures level, listening to his wife tell him he was ruining everything. He thought about walking away. He thought about what it had felt like at the time, not righteous, not powerful, just necessary, the way doing a painful thing is necessary when you've run out of reasons to defer it. He saw Danny first, the way he always saw Danny in a crowd. She had his height already at 14, and she walked like she meant it. Jordan was beside her, shorter, his backpack enormous relative to his frame. They were talking to each other, not looking around yet. Then Danny looked up and saw him, and something happened in her face. Not a smile exactly, more like the specific relief of a person who has been bracing for something and found an anchor instead. Jordan spotted him half a second later and started moving faster. They came through the doors, and Jordan walked directly into him and hugged him with the unself-conscious physicality of an 11-year-old who had not yet learned to make those impulses look casual. Miles put his arm around the back of Jordan's head and held on. Danny stopped a foot away and looked at him. She was carrying more than luggage in that look. She was carrying the whole week. "Hey," she said. "Hey," he said. She stepped in and hugged him, which she did with more reserve than Jordan, but more deliberateness, the hug of someone who has decided to do it as a full commitment rather than a reflex. He held on to both of them for a moment in the arrivals area of Hartsfield-Jackson, while the doors opened and closed around them. Then he looked up. Vanessa was coming through the doors 10 feet behind the kids, rolling her suitcase. The big one. The one she'd packed 2 days before the trip without asking for help. She was looking at her phone. When she looked up and saw Miles standing there with his arms around the kids, something moved across her face that he couldn't entirely read. Not guilt. Not quite. Something more complicated. The look of a person who had walked into a room and found the furniture rearranged and was recalibrating. "Miles," she said. "Vanessa," he said. The kids stepped back slightly, the way children did when they felt tension in the air around them, the instinct older than language. "I didn't know you were picking everyone up," Vanessa said. "The kids needed a ride home." He kept his voice level. "Car's in short term. You want to ride with us, or did you have a car service?" She looked at him, the recalibrating happening again, more visibly. "I'll ride with you," she said. They walked to the car without saying much. Jordan filled the silence the way Jordan always filled silences, talking about the metro system, about the match, about a food stand near the stadium that had served something he couldn't stop thinking about. Miles listened and responded and asked the right follow-up questions, and Danny was quieter beside him, watching the space between her parents with those eyes that saw too much. He put the bags in the trunk. He got in the driver's seat. Vanessa got in the passenger seat. The kids got in the back. He drove. For a while, the only conversation was Jordan's, still going, gradually winding down as the drive settled into its rhythm and the morning heat came through the windows. Vanessa was on her phone. Then her phone buzzed differently. Not a text. Something with a heavier notification sound. She looked at the screen. Miles watched the road. He did not watch her face, but he felt the change in the car the way you feel a pressure shift before weather turns. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, very controlled. "Miles." "What is this?" It wasn't a question. He knew what was on her phone. The service had been confirmed for Friday, and it was Friday, and she had just been served electronically, which was the method David had filed under given that she'd been traveling and a physical service would have been more complicated. He kept his eyes on the road. In the back seat, Jordan had finally gone quiet. Danny was looking out the window. "We'll talk about it at home," Miles said. "Not now." "Miles, not now," he said again, and there was something in his voice that stopped her. Not anger. She'd heard his anger before, knew what to do with it. This was something else. This was the voice of a man who had already done the thing she was responding to, who had done it days ago, who had been 3 steps ahead since a Tuesday morning when he opened a desk drawer and found a bank statement that wasn't his. She understood, in that moment, that the ground had shifted. He watched the highway. The kids were still. The car moved forward in the Friday morning traffic and Miles Carter drove his family home. knowing that home meant something different now than it had 8 days ago, knowing the weeks ahead were going to be harder than anything he'd navigated yet, knowing his children were in the back seat and that they were what mattered, not the anger, not the betrayal, not the $23,000 or the mortgage co-signature or the deleted photographs or the rolling suitcase packed 2 days early. What mattered was what he built from here. And he knew how to build. He had always known how to build. This is a work of pure cinematic fiction created solely for entertainment purposes. All characters, locations, organizations, and events are entirely fictional. Us. The house felt wrong the moment they walked into it. Not wrong in any dramatic sense. Nothing was moved, nothing was broken, but the air had the particular tension of a space where everyone knew something was coming and nobody was ready to be the first one to name it. Miles set the bags down in the entryway. Jordan disappeared upstairs immediately, which was what Jordan did when he was uncomfortable, found height and distance and the familiar geography of his room. Danny went to the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, stood there looking at it without taking anything out. Miles recognized that posture. It was his posture. She was buying time. Vanessa stood in the living room with her phone in her hand and her suitcase still beside her and looked at Miles with an expression he hadn't seen on her face in a very long time. Not anger, not the managed frustration she'd used at the airport. Something rawer than that. Something that was the beginning of understanding that the plan had not survived contact with reality. "I need you to tell me what you think you're doing," she said. Miles looked at her. "I filed for divorce. You were served this morning. David Park is my attorney. You'll need to retain someone." David Park. She said the name like she was turning it over, checking it for weight. "You went to David. He's the best I know." "Miles." She moved toward him slightly and then stopped, like she'd remembered something. "We don't need attorneys. We can talk about this." "We tried talking," he said. "At the airport. You told me I was ruining everyone's trip and to go home." He kept his voice even. "So I went home. And I handled some things while you were gone." She looked at him differently then. The recalibrating he'd seen in the car. More of it now. Faster. She was running through the last week in her head. He could see it happening, checking what he might have found, what he might know, what the exposure was. He watched her do it and said nothing. "What things did you handle?" she said carefully. "That'll come out through the attorneys." He picked up her suitcase and set it beside the stairs. "The kids need to settle back in. We're not doing this in front of them. You don't get to just—" She stopped. Started again, differently. "Miles, whatever you think you found, it's not— you don't have the full picture." "I have a pretty full picture," he said, "but we'll let the attorneys sort out the details." She stared at him. He had known this woman for 19 years, and he could see her calculating, not maliciously, or not only maliciously, but in the way of a person who had spent a long time managing a situation and was now encountering a variable that hadn't been in the plan. She had expected him to be hurt and reactive. She had probably expected tears or rage, or the kind of desperate negotiation that let the other person control the terms. She had not expected 47 pages and a forensic accountant and a Monday morning filing while she was on a trip he had paid for. "Where are you going to sleep?" she said finally. "I'll take the guest room." He looked at her. "I think it's better for the kids if we're both here until the attorneys advise otherwise. I'm not asking you to leave the house tonight." She seemed almost thrown by that, by the reasonableness of it, by the fact that he was not screaming. "Okay," she said very quietly. And then she picked up her carry-on and went upstairs without another word. And Miles stood in his living room alone and breathed through his nose, slowly, and told himself he'd gotten through the first part. Bet. The family therapist David had recommended was a woman named Dr. Sandra Osei, who operated out of a practice in Decatur and had a waiting room that smelled like cedar and had actual books on the shelves, not the decorative kind. Miles appreciated that. He'd had enough of things that looked right, but weren't. He brought the kids the following Tuesday. He had told them Sunday, in the kitchen, with plain language and without excessive preamble, their mom and dad were going to separate. It was going to involve attorneys and some changes in how the family was arranged. It was not their fault in any direction or degree, and he had made an appointment with a doctor who helped families talk through hard things. Danny had gone very still. Jordan had asked if they were going to have to move, and Miles had said probably not right away, maybe eventually, they would figure it out together. Jordan had nodded with the careful nod of a child processing information he didn't entirely understand but was choosing to trust. Danny had waited until Jordan went upstairs and then looked at Miles with those precise eyes and said, "Did you know before the airport?" "Yes," he said. "There was no point in anything else." "That's why you were so calm." "That's part of why." She had nodded slowly, not with relief. It wasn't relief exactly, more like the specific satisfaction of a person who suspected something and has been told they were not wrong, that their read on the room was accurate, that they could trust their own perceptions. Miles thought that was maybe the most important thing he could have given her in that moment. Dr. Osei spent the first session mostly listening. She was 60, or close to it, with close-cropped gray hair and the manner of someone who had heard most things and found nearly all of them understandable. She did not treat the kids like subjects. She asked Jordan about the metro system. Miles had mentioned it in the intake form under recent positive experiences, and Jordan, delighted to have a new audience for this material, explained the entire route from the hotel to the stadium in detail. Danny watched Dr. Osei the way Danny watched everyone, measuring, deciding. By the end of the first session, Dr. Osei had said very little of substance, and Miles could already feel something in the room that had been tightly coiled begin to loosen slightly. He didn't know what he'd expected. He hadn't expected much, honestly. He'd been skeptical of this kind of thing in the abstract and found himself in practice grateful for the cedar smell and the real books, and the woman who asked his 11-year-old son about a metro system. They scheduled 4 more sessions over the next 6 weeks. Miles drove them every time. The discovery process began in earnest the 3rd week of June. Vanessa had retained an attorney named Patricia Holloway, who had a reputation in Atlanta family law circles that David Park summarized as aggressive and good, which Miles understood to mean the next several months were going to be expensive and unpleasant in specific technical ways. David delivered this assessment without editorializing, which Miles appreciated. He didn't need editorializing. He needed information. Patricia Holloway's first move was to request an accounting of Carter Construction as a marital asset, which Miles had expected, and for which he and Marcus and David had spent 2 weeks preparing. The argument Holloway would make, and David had walked him through this, was that the business, having been built during the marriage, was partially a marital asset subject to equitable division. This was a standard argument and not without merit in Georgia law. The counter-argument was the misappropriation, that Vanessa had already extracted value from the business through unauthorized transfers, that this constituted a financial tort against Miles personally, and that the court should consider it in assessing any equitable claim she might make. "She's going to say the transfers were with your permission," David told him during their 3rd formal meeting, a Tuesday morning in late June. "She gave you the card back. She'll say you knew. She'll say it was a household expense arrangement." $23,000 in household expenses, Miles said. "I know. Marcus's pattern analysis is what kills that argument. The timing relative to your schedule, the amounts designed to avoid flagging, it's too deliberate to be casual household spending. But we need to be prepared for her to make the argument." David folded his hands on the desk. "The mortgage co-signature is separate and stronger. That one is harder to explain away." "What's her explanation?" Holloway hasn't revealed their narrative on that yet, but I expect it to be something like, "She was helping a colleague qualify for housing. It was a professional favor. It doesn't indicate a personal relationship." David paused. "The deleted photographs make that harder. Ray's documentation makes it harder. But until we're in front of a judge, we don't know how hard." Miles nodded. He was learning over these weeks the rhythm of legal proceedings, the way it moved in lurches and pauses, the way information surfaced and receded, the way patience was not just a virtue in this process, but a functional requirement. He was not naturally impatient, which helped. He was naturally methodical, which helped more. "What's the timeline looking like?" he asked. "If it goes uncontested, if she agrees to terms, we could be looking at 4 to 6 months. If it's litigated, 12 to 18 is realistic." David looked at him. "My read on Holloway's strategy right now is she's trying to position for a settlement. She knows what we have. She's looking for what we'll take. What we'll take, Miles repeated. On the financial side, yes, the house, the business valuation, liquid assets. The custody arrangement is the other piece, and that's where it gets more personal. Miles thought about the iPad searches. How to document an absent spouse for custody. She was planning to paint me as uninvolved. She was. That's harder to sustain now, given what we have, and given what your kids are willing to say, carefully, through proper channels. David leaned back. Miles, I want to be honest with you. The custody piece is going to require your kids to be involved in a way that's uncomfortable. Not testimony in a courtroom. We'll avoid that if at all possible. But Dr. Osei's assessments, the kids' documented preferences as they're allowed to express them, that's part of the record. Danny's going to be clear, Miles said. She always is. And Jordan? Miles thought about his son in the back seat of the car, asking if they were going to have to move, nodding with that careful, trusting nod. Jordan will follow Danny's lead. He always does. He paused. That's not a bad thing. No, David said. It's not. The news about Claire Morgan came in the 4th week of June, and it did not come from Ray. It came from Terrence. Terrence had a cousin who worked in commercial real estate, and the cousin knew people at the property management firm where Vanessa and Claire both worked. And in the way of Atlanta, which was a large city that operated in many ways like a large town, word moved. Terrence appeared in Miles's office doorway on a Thursday afternoon with the specific expression of a man who had information he wasn't sure he was supposed to have. Boss, he said, you got a minute? Miles looked up from the Marietta project file. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Maybe. Terrence came in and closed the door, which he almost never did. My cousin texted me this morning. He heard from somebody at Vanessa's firm that the HR department has been doing an internal review. He paused. About Claire Morgan. Miles set down his pen. Tell me. Apparently some financial irregularities came up. In property transactions, the kind where a leasing consultant steers clients toward specific properties and arrangements. Terrence stopped, looked like he was choosing words carefully. And takes money she's not supposed to take for doing it. Miles was quiet for a moment. He was thinking about a woman who worked in property acquisitions who had a condo co-signed by a married woman whose husband owned a construction company. He was thinking about the $23,000. He was thinking about numbers are harder to lie with. How solid is this, he said. My cousin's solid. I can't speak to his source. Okay. Miles picked up his phone and called Ray. Ray answered in 2 rings. I was actually going to call you today. You already know. I got a tip this morning. The firm's internal audit is preliminary right now, but it looks like Morgan has been running a referral scheme, steering leasing clients to specific developers and taking kickbacks. Apparently it's been going on for a while. A pause. Miles, there's a Carter Construction connection in the documents they're looking at. Miles went very still. What kind of connection? One of the developers in the scheme did subcontracting work with a Carter Construction project 2 years ago. Morgan's name appears as a referral contact. Nobody's saying Carter Construction knew about the kickbacks. You almost certainly didn't, from what I can see. But the name comes up. He sat with that for a long moment. The construction industry in Atlanta was not small, but it wasn't enormous either, and overlaps happened. And not all overlaps meant what they appeared to mean. But the optics of it, his company's name in an HR fraud investigation at his wife's firm, at a moment when his wife was in divorce proceedings, were not ideal. I need to get ahead of that, he said. Yes, you do, Ray said. Today, if possible. He called David before he hung up with Ray. David picked up and Miles told him in 3 sentences. David said 4 words. Come in right now. They spent 2 hours that afternoon working through the exposure. David's read was measured. The subcontracting connection was peripheral. Miles's company was not under investigation, and getting ahead of it with a proactive disclosure to his own attorney and a documented statement of what Carter Construction knew and when was the right move. It was also, David noted with the directness Miles had come to rely on, an opportunity. If Morgan was running a kickback scheme at the firm, David said, and Vanessa knew about it, and given the depth of that relationship, it's a reasonable question. Then we have another layer of conduct that's relevant to her credibility in these proceedings. He looked at Miles. I'm not saying she was involved in the scheme. I'm saying if she knew and didn't disclose, and if any of those transactions touched Carter Construction, even tangentially, that's something a judge finds very significant. How do we find out if she knew? That's partly Ray's job and partly what discovery surfaces. If Holloway is paying attention, and she is, she'll see this coming and try to get ahead of it herself, which means the next few weeks could get complicated. Miles rubbed his face. He had not slept well in 2 weeks. He was not sleeping badly. He wasn't lying awake panicking, but he was waking at 5 consistently, his brain already running, which was its own kind of fatigue. He thought about the backlash he used to get from Vanessa about early mornings, how she'd said it made her feel like he was always leaving. He wondered now what else had been in that complaint, what else had been running underneath what she said to him. "What do I do today?" he said, concretely. "Today you write a statement, I review it, we file it with the court as a proactive disclosure. It establishes your good faith. It puts Carter Construction on record as uninvolved and forthcoming." David picked up his pen. "And you go home, and you make dinner for your kids, and you don't talk to Vanessa about any of this. We're barely talking anyway. Keep it that way. Everything goes through attorneys from this point forward. If she approaches you directly about any of this, the Morgan situation, the proceedings, any of it, you say, 'Please contact David Park's office,' and you end the conversation." Miles nodded. "Okay." "Miles." David looked at him across the desk. "You're doing this right. I know it doesn't feel like it because it feels like everything is getting more complicated instead of less. But you're doing it right." He drove home. He made chicken and rice, which was his standard dinner on a Thursday, the meal he made because he'd made it every Thursday for 9 years, and the kids knew it and expected it, and there was something in that consistency he was holding on to more deliberately now than he ever had before. Jordan ate 2 portions. Danny helped him clean up without being asked, which she didn't always do. Vanessa ate in the bedroom. She had been doing that more in the past week. Miles was not sure whether it was guilt or strategy or the ordinary mechanics of 2 people who couldn't be in the same room without the weight of everything pressing down. Probably all 3. He left a plate in the refrigerator with plastic wrap over it and did not say anything about it. The second week of July, Patricia Holloway filed a motion that Miles had been told to expect, but that landed with its own specific weight nonetheless. She was requesting a vocational evaluation of Miles's business to establish what she framed as the true marital value of Carter Construction, a number that, by her methodology, would be significantly higher than the operating value Miles and Marcus had documented. It was the standard move in a case involving a self-owned business. Miles knew it was coming. That didn't make it pleasant to read. He was reading the motion in his office at 7 p.m., the building quiet around him, Terrence and everyone else long gone, when his phone lit up with a text from a number he didn't immediately recognize. The message was short. "Mr. Carter, I think we should talk. You deserve to know some things. Claire Morgan." He stared at the message for a long time. Then he called David. David listened and said, without hesitation, "Do not respond. Forward me the text. Do not, under any circumstances, have a conversation with her without me present." "What does she want?" "I don't know. But I know that whatever it is, it's either information that helps you, in which case we get it through the right channel, or it's an attempt to create a narrative that serves her in some way, in which case you need protection." A pause. "Do you know if she's retained counsel?" "I don't know." "Find out tomorrow. Ray can check. And forward me that text tonight." Miles forwarded it. He sat at his desk for another 20 minutes after that, looking at the street below through the window. He thought about a white Lexus in his driveway. He thought about his mother's face. He thought about what it meant that the woman at the center of all of this had reached out to him directly, without attorneys, with "You deserve to know some things." It could mean anything. It could mean remorse. It could mean she and Vanessa had fractured, which Ray had indicated was a possibility, given the pressure of the proceedings and the HR investigation, and she was positioning herself. It could mean she had information she thought was valuable and was trying to negotiate with it. It could mean all of those things simultaneously, because people were not simple, and affairs that collapsed under legal pressure did so in messy, complicated ways that served nobody cleanly. He did not respond to the text. He went home and checked that the kids were asleep and stood in the kitchen for a while looking at nothing, and then he went to the guest room that had become his room and lay down and looked at the ceiling. Claire Morgan's HR situation resolved, or rather escalated to its next phase, in mid-July, when the property management firm terminated her employment and referred the matter to an external auditor. Ray confirmed this on a Wednesday morning, along with the detail that the scope of the kickback scheme was larger than initially reported. 8 separate transactions over 14 months, involving 4 different developer contacts, totaling approximately $60,000 in undisclosed referral payments. The number sat in Miles's chest with a particular weight when he heard it. $60,000. And Vanessa had co-signed her mortgage 14 months ago, right in the middle of that period. He did not know, David had been careful to say they did not know, whether Vanessa had knowledge of the kickbacks, but the timeline was what it was. 3 days later, Holloway filed a motion withdrawing the vocational evaluation request. David called Miles within an hour. "What does that mean?" Miles said. "It means they're recalibrating. The Morgan situation changes the landscape for them. If Morgan is facing financial fraud exposure and Vanessa's connection to her is documented, pushing aggressively on asset discovery opens doors we might walk through that Holloway doesn't want opened." David paused. "I think they want to settle." "On what terms?" "We don't know yet, but I expect an approach within the week." It came in 4 days. A formal settlement proposal from Holloway's office, 12 pages, laying out a structure. Vanessa would waive any claim to Carter Construction in exchange for the marital home and a settlement payment. Custody would be joint, primary residence with Miles, given the children's documented preference, a fact that appeared in the proposal with a kind of grudging practicality, as if Holloway had looked at Dr. Osei's preliminary assessment and made a calculation. Vanessa would have the Audi. Miles would keep the F-150. The investment account would be divided, 60 to Miles, 40 to Vanessa, which was a significant climb down from the equal split her initial position had implied. David walked him through it line by line. Miles listened to all of it and asked questions about 3 specific items and was quiet for a long time after. "What's your read?" he said. "My read is that it's a reasonable opening offer, not final terms. They've given ground on the business, on custody, on the investment split. They're holding on the house, and they'll hold hard on it. The settlement payment is negotiable." David tapped the pages. "My recommendation is we counter. We accept the custody structure. We reject the house concession as written. We propose a buyout at a price we control the appraisal on, and we modify the settlement payment down. Can we get the house?" "I think so. It'll take 2 or 3 rounds of counter, but yes, I think we get the house." He looked at Miles. "Is that what you want?" Miles thought about the basketball hoop and the abandoned garden and the fence that needed painting. He thought about Thursday chicken and rice. He thought about Danny doing her homework at the kitchen table and Jordan coming down the stairs in the mornings making too much noise, and his mother sitting in the living room on Sunday afternoons when she drove over from Decatur. "That's what I want," he said. "Then let's counter." Boom. The negotiation took 5 weeks. Miles did not enjoy them. He had thought in the early days of all this that reaching the legal phase would feel like progress. And it did. But progress in this context meant a specific kind of grinding friction. Back and forth through attorneys, documents reviewed and revised and re-reviewed, numbers adjusted in increments that felt both significant and tediously small. He worked. He ran the Marietta project through to its corrected phase and started 2 new contracts and hired a new project manager because the business needed it, and the business didn't stop needing things because his personal life was in pieces. He also talked to his kids, not about the proceedings. David had been clear about what was appropriate to discuss with them, but about the ordinary things, the daily things, the basketball hoop and the homework and the food preferences and the friends. He asked Jordan about a kid named Marcus from the soccer camp who had apparently become a significant presence in Jordan's social universe. He drove Danny to her tutoring sessions for the SAT prep she'd started early, which was a Danny move through and through, and they talked in the car the way they'd always talked in the car, sideways, without full eye contact, which was how both of them preferred real conversations. One Tuesday afternoon in August, driving back from tutoring, Danny said, "Is it going to be just us? Like, officially?" "What do you mean?" "Me, you, Jordan. Is that going to be the unit?" He thought about how to answer that. "For now, yeah." She looked out the window. The Atlanta summer was still going hard, the kind of heat that made the air look slightly thick. "I think that's probably okay," she said. "I mean, I know it's not supposed to be okay, but I think I'm okay with it." "You don't have to be okay with it." "I know." She turned and looked at him. "But I kind of am." He didn't say anything. He kept his eyes on the road. "Jordan is going to be fine," she said, with the authority of an older sister who had appointed herself his advanced scout through life. "He's more upset than he shows, but he'll be fine. He's got you, and he's got Grandma Dorothy, and he's got soccer." "What about you? What have you got?" She seemed to consider this genuinely. "I've got the same stuff, plus I'm smarter about it than he is." She said it without arrogance, as a plain observation. "I know what happened, and I know it wasn't about us, and I know you're handling it right. That helps." "How do you know I'm handling it right?" She gave him a look. "Because you're not screaming. Because you didn't blow everything up at the airport. Because you came home and you did the work instead of just being angry about it." She turned back to the window. "That's handling it right." He drove the rest of the way home without saying much, and he thought about his daughter, and he thought about the kind of person she was becoming, and he felt something in his chest that was not grief and not pride exactly, but something adjacent to both. The feeling of a man who has failed at some things and gotten at least one thing right. The settlement was finalized on the 14th of August. Miles kept the house. He kept Carter Construction in full, with a structured payment to Vanessa representing her agreed share of the home equity she was releasing. He got primary custody. Vanessa got the Audi and a reduced settlement figure and visitation on an agreed schedule that Dr. Osei had helped structure with the children's input, though input was a gentle word for what Danny had communicated through the formal channel with characteristic precision. He signed the papers in David's office on a Thursday morning. David's paralegal witnessed. There was no ceremony to it, which was how Miles preferred it, a thing that needed doing, done cleanly. Afterward, David walked him to the elevator. "You held your line," David said. "Start to finish. I had good counsel. You also had 47 pages and a legal pad on day one." David pushed the elevator button. "Most people come in here a week after everything falls apart with nothing but feelings. You came in with documentation." He paused. "That matters." The elevator arrived. Miles stepped in. He looked back at David Park, his old friend, who had cleared an hour on a Monday morning without asking questions and then spent 9 weeks defending the ground Miles had spent 17 years building. "I owe you a lot of bourbon," Miles said. "Start a tab," David said, and the doors closed. He drove to the office. He had a 2 o'clock project meeting and a subcontractor review at 4, and the Marietta final walkthrough in the morning. He had 42 employees and 2 new contracts and a fence in the backyard that still needed painting. He parked, got out of the truck, and stood in the parking lot for a moment in the August heat. Patrice waved at him through the flooring showroom glass. He waved back. Not on autopilot this time, actually waving. He went upstairs and got to work. This is a work of pure cinematic fiction created solely for entertainment purposes. All characters, locations, organizations, and events are entirely fictional. Well, the fence got painted the last weekend of August. Miles did it himself, which was not the practical choice. He had employees who could have done it in 2 hours on a slow Friday. But it was the right choice, in the way that some things are right, not because they're efficient, but because they need to be done by a specific person at a specific time for reasons that don't fully translate into words. He started Saturday morning at 7 with a roller and a drop cloth and a gallon of exterior white, and he worked through the heat until noon, and then he ate a sandwich standing in the backyard looking at what he'd done. And then he finished the back section in the afternoon while Jordan kicked a soccer ball against the side of the garage, and Danny sat on the back steps with her headphones around her neck, reading something for school. It was an ordinary afternoon. That was what he kept coming back to in the weeks after the papers were signed. The ordinariness of things. how the days moved forward regardless. How Jordan still needed rides, and Danny still had opinions, and the business still had problems that required his actual attention. And all of that movement, all of that forward friction, was its own kind of answer to the question he hadn't known he was asking. The question was, what do you do with yourself after the worst thing? The answer, it turned out, was, you paint the fence, you make Thursday chicken and rice, you drive to soccer camp and tutoring, and you wave at Patrice through the flooring showroom glass, and you call your mother on Sunday mornings, and you let the days do what days do, which is accumulate into something that eventually looks, from a distance, like a life. He did not arrive at this understanding cleanly or quickly. He had bad nights, not many, but some, where he lay in the dark in the bedroom that was now fully his, and thought about 17 years with the particular ache of someone trying to locate which memories were real and which had been performances. That was the thing nobody warned you about, the forensic quality of grief after betrayal. You didn't just mourn the loss, you audited it. You went back through the archive looking for the seams, the moments where what you'd believed and what was actually happening had diverged, and you tried to figure out how long the gap had been there and how you'd missed it. He had not missed it entirely. That was something he'd come to accept. There had been signs he'd interpreted charitably, explanations he'd chosen over suspicions, a pattern of giving benefit of the doubt that had become, over time, a habit of not looking too closely. He was not a stupid man. He had been, in this specific way, a man who preferred peace to clarity, and the preference had cost him. He was done with that preference, not in a hard, punishing way. He didn't want to become someone who trusted no one and questioned everything and turned every relationship into an audit. He had seen what that looked like in other men, and it was its own kind of damage. But he was done with choosing comfort over truth. He was 43 years old, and he had learned something real, which was that the foundation had to be tested before you built, and that applied to everything, concrete and people and the stories you told yourself about your own life. The first real conversation he had with his mother after everything settled happened on a Sunday morning in mid-September, sitting in her kitchen in Decatur with the coffee she made too strong and the morning light coming through the yellow curtains she'd had in that kitchen since before Miles was born. Dorothy Carter was not a woman who pressed. She had given him space through the summer the way she'd given him space through difficult things his whole life, present, available, not demanding anything he wasn't ready to give. But that Sunday she asked him a question. "Do you think you saw it?" she said. "Before Tuesday, before the bank statement, do you think part of you already knew?" He sat with that for a while. His coffee was getting cold and he didn't care. "I think I knew something was wrong," he said. "Not specifically, but there was something, a feeling I kept choosing not to follow." He looked at the yellow curtains. "You know how you can feel a draft in a room, and instead of finding where it's coming from, you just put on a sweater?" "Yes," she said. "I wore a lot of sweaters." She made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "You got that from your father. He was the same way, preferred the sweater." She picked up her mug. "It's not a character flaw, but it's a thing you have to watch." "I know that now." "You knew it before. You just know it differently now." He looked at her. She had the face she'd always had, the strong bones of it, the eyes that did not soften when they were being honest. He had always looked more like her than like his father, which she had treated as a matter of pride, and his father had treated as entirely appropriate. "Are you going to be okay?" she said. Not the way people asked it as a formality. The real version. "I think so," he said. "I'm not the same as before, but I don't think I want to be." She nodded, once, like that was the right answer. "The kids are going to be fine. Danny's going to be more than fine. That girl is something else. She told me she's okay with how it's turned out, like it was a project outcome." Dorothy made the almost laugh sound again. "She's 14 going on 45. Always has been." She set her mug down. "Jordan's quieter than I'd like, but he's not broken. He talks to me, you know, when you drop him off." "What does he say?" "He asks about your father sometimes, what your father was like." She paused. "I think he's trying to understand what men are supposed to look like, when things are hard." Miles absorbed that. The idea of his 11-year-old sitting at the same kitchen table trying to build a template out of a grandfather he'd never known and a father he was watching navigate something enormous. He thought about what Jordan was seeing. He hoped it was something worth building from. "What do you tell him?" he asked. "I tell him your father wasn't perfect. He had a temper, and he was too proud, and he worked too much." She said this without apology, as a woman who had loved an imperfect man with full knowledge of what she was working with. But when things were hard, he showed up. He didn't disappear. He didn't make the hard thing someone else's problem. She looked at Miles steadily. "I tell Jordan that's what he's watching his dad do right now. Show up." Miles looked at the yellow curtains for a moment. He did not trust himself to say anything, so he picked up his cold coffee and drank it. October arrived with cooler air and 2 major Carter construction contracts that required his full attention in ways he was genuinely grateful for. A commercial renovation in Sandy Springs, and a residential development outside Roswell that was the largest single project the company had taken on in 4 years. He hired a second project manager. He restructured the operations side with Terrence's input, which was overdue and should have happened 18 months ago, and hadn't because he'd been carrying too many things personally that should have been delegated. The business had grown faster than he'd been willing to admit, and the growing had created gaps, and the gaps needed to be addressed by someone paying attention. He paid attention. Marcus noted at their quarterly review in mid-October that the company's financials were the cleanest they'd been in 3 years. Miles looked at the report and thought about $23,400 and thought about how much easier it was to see clearly when you were no longer choosing not to. "You want to talk expansion?" Marcus said. Miles looked up. "What kind?" "The Roswell project puts us in a residential development tier we haven't been in before. If it goes well, and from what I'm seeing it's going well, you'd have the track record to bid on projects that were previously out of reach. Municipal contracts, multi-building residential." Marcus tapped the report. "You've been building a company that's good at what it does. You could start building a company that does bigger things." Miles thought about that. He thought about the ribbon cutting 6 years ago, the community center in Northside, the grin he couldn't produce on demand that was photographed on his wall. He thought about what it meant to build something that lasted. "Let's talk about it in January," he said, "after Roswell is through the first phase." "That's what I figured you'd say." Marcus closed the folder. "Miles, for what it's worth, you handled this year the way I'd want to handle something like this. I watched you. You didn't let it eat the work." "The work helped," Miles said honestly. "Gave me somewhere to put the energy." "That's the thing about building things," Marcus said. "They give you somewhere to put it." The message from Claire Morgan had sat unanswered on his phone since July. He had not responded, as David instructed, and after the settlement was finalized, he had assumed it would simply remain there, an artifact of that period, like the folder with the trip confirmations he'd eventually moved to a box in the closet, not ready to throw away, but not needing to look at either. Then in November, she called him directly. He almost didn't pick up. He looked at the screen, the number he'd saved as "Do Not Answer per David" with a note underneath, and he thought about it for 4 rings. Then he picked up because something told him there was information he needed and that not having it would matter later. "I know you're not supposed to talk to me," she said immediately. She sounded different from the confident woman he'd met twice. Smaller, somehow. The HR investigation had run its course and the firm had referred the matter to a civil attorney representing the affected clients, which Ray had confirmed meant she was currently facing financial liability in the range of $60,000, plus legal fees, plus the reputational damage in a field where reputation was everything. "I'm not going to say anything that helps me. There are some things you should know, that I think you should know. And I know I don't have any right to decide what you deserve, but I'm going to tell you anyway." He stood in his kitchen. It was a Tuesday evening. The kids were upstairs. The house was quiet. "I'm listening," he said, which was what he always said when he was listening. "The plan was older than you think," she said. "Not what you found. The bank account that started about a year before the trip. But the decision, the actual decision about the marriage, that was longer." A pause. "I'm not saying this to hurt you. I think you should know so you don't spend time wondering if there was a specific thing you did that caused it. There wasn't. It was a decision she made and then built a structure around. Miles was quiet for a moment. How long? About 3 years. 3 years. He let that land. 3 years ago, he had been 40, and Carter Construction had just hit a major revenue milestone, and he had taken Vanessa to dinner to celebrate, and she had seemed genuinely happy. He had read it as genuine, and they had talked about the future. He had been talking about the future of a marriage that had already been decided. He had been making plans in a house where the demolition was already scheduled. She's a person who makes decisions and then executes them, Claire said. I know that doesn't make it better, but it means it was never about something you failed to be. It was just a decision. He thought about he won't even know what's happening until everything is already done. He thought about the iPad searches, the rolling suitcase, the co-signed mortgage, the architecture of a departure. Why are you telling me this? He said. A long pause. Because I watched what happened to your kids. Danny looked at me at the airport. She didn't know what she was looking at exactly, but she knew something was wrong, and she had that look like she'd been knowing something was wrong for a while. Her voice was not steady. I'm not a good person in this story. I know that, but I'm also not someone who wanted those kids to be part of it, and they were part of it, and I have to live with that. Another pause. I thought you should know it wasn't impulsive. That might make it worse. I don't know, but you seem like someone who does better with the true version of things. He stood at the kitchen window. The backyard was dark, and he could just see the pale stripe of the fence he'd painted in August. Yeah, he said, I do better with the true version. She hung up shortly after. He stood there for a while. He thought about whether what she'd told him changed anything in a material way, and he decided it didn't. Not the legal outcome, not the custody arrangement, not the forward plan for his business, or his kids, or his own quietly rebuilding sense of what his days were supposed to look like. But it changed something in the more interior geography, the part of him that was still, in quiet moments, running the audit, looking for the seam, trying to find the specific failure point that had made 17 years dissolve. There was no single failure point. There was a decision made by someone else, long before he knew it was being made. He could not have built his way out of that. He could not have planned or loved or worked his way into a different outcome. Some things were not his to fix, and that was the hardest truth of all for a man who believed in solid foundations. The truth that you could do everything right and still be building on ground that someone else had already decided to abandon. He let himself sit with that for a while, and then he let it go, not because it stopped hurting, but because he understood finally that holding it didn't change it. The World Cup final was in December. He had not planned anything around it. He'd kept his distance from that whole landscape for the obvious reasons. But Jordan had been watching every match he could get on television, had become, over the course of the year, genuinely devoted to the sport in the way 11-year-olds became devoted to things, completely and without apology. And when the final was announced and Jordan said carefully, the way he said things he wanted and wasn't sure he was allowed to want, the final's on Saturday. They're doing a watch party downtown at the fan zone. Miles had looked at his son and said, Then let's go. He called his mother that same evening. You want to come to a watch party Saturday? Dorothy Carter had never been to a watch party in her life. Is there somewhere to sit? We'll find somewhere. Will it be loud? It'll be very loud. A pause. All right, she said, like she was doing him a favor, which she probably was. They went on Saturday, Miles and Jordan and Danny and Dorothy, who wore sensible shoes and a scarf and looked at the downtown fan zone setup with the expression of a woman who had seen most things and was prepared to see this. Jordan was vibrating with excitement in a way that made him look younger than 11, and Miles was glad for it, glad for the uncomplicated physical joy of a kid who had found something he loved and was being allowed to love it fully. Danny bought a team jersey at one of the stands. Different team than the one she'd bought on the trip, Miles noted. She didn't mention the previous one. He didn't either. They found a spot with a decent sightline to one of the big screens, and Dorothy sat in a folding chair that a vendor helpfully produced when she asked without apparent embarrassment, and Miles stood beside her while the kids pushed a little closer to the action. The crowd was dense and loud and multicolored in the way of a city that contained everybody. The match itself was close. the kind of game that went deep into extra time and required investment. Jordan explained things to Dorothy, who asked questions with genuine curiosity and none of the condescension adults sometimes used when pretending to be interested in things they weren't. Danny watched with the focused attention she brought to things she'd decided deserved it. Miles watched all of them, more than he watched the screen. He thought about 8 months ago, standing in this same city's airport, hearing his wife tell him he was ruining everything. He thought about the drive home, alone, the city exactly as it was now, the heat, the traffic, the particular Atlanta light, and the difference between the man who had walked to his car that morning and the man standing here now was not that the second one had fewer problems, or a cleaner life, or anything like resolution in the made-for-television sense. The difference was that the second man was standing on ground he'd tested. Ground he knew. He had turned every stone. He had found what was under them. And he had decided what to build on what remained. That was not a small thing. Somewhere in the middle of extra time, Jordan turned around and found Miles through the crowd with his eyes, checking that he was still there. Miles raised his chin. "I'm here." And Jordan turned back to the screen. Dorothy leaned over slightly. "He keeps doing that," she said. "Checking." "I know." "That's not insecurity," she said. "That's a boy who learned that people leave and is making sure you're one of the ones who doesn't." Miles kept his eyes on the back of his son's head. "I know that too." "Good." She straightened up. "Then keep standing there." Bawok. The new year brought the Roswell project into its second phase and the Sandy Springs renovation through to completion, and a company holiday party at a restaurant Terrence had found in Midtown that was actually enjoyable, which Miles had not expected but allowed himself to accept. He made a speech that was shorter than anyone expected and thanked the people who had done the work, specifically and by name, because they had. In January, as he'd told Marcus, he sat down and talked about expansion. In February, Carter Construction submitted its first bid on a municipal contract, a public recreation center in DeKalb County, 3 buildings, outdoor infrastructure, timeline of 18 months. It was the biggest bid the company had ever assembled. Marcus and Miles worked on it across 4 evenings at the office, eating bad takeout and arguing about contingency margins. And it felt, Miles thought, like the company he'd been growing toward without quite knowing it. A company that had earned the right to bid on this kind of thing through years of doing the smaller things well. They won the contract in March. Terrence literally stood up from his desk when Miles announced it. The site supervisor, Kenny Briggs, who was not a demonstrative man, shook Miles's hand with both of his and did not let go for an uncomfortable extra second. Marcus sent a text that said only, "Told you." Miles stood in his office that afternoon with the contract letter in his hand and looked out the window at Peachtree Industrial, at the parking lot where Patrice still waved at him through the flooring showroom glass every morning, at the city beyond that, the skyline of a place he had been building in for 20 years and would keep building in for however many more he had. And he felt something that was not triumph. He was careful about triumph, had seen what it did to people, but was something quieter and more durable. The feeling of a man who had tested the ground and found it solid and was ready to build. He thought about what his mother had said in September. "It's not that you know something new, you just know it differently now." He understood what she meant. He had always believed in solid foundations. He had always believed you built carefully, tested the soil, raised walls where the ground was true. He had believed all of that and had somehow exempted his own life from the principle for long enough to let the ground go soft under him without noticing. He noticed now. He would keep noticing. It was not a comfortable thing to carry, this new vigilance, this refusal to choose the sweater over the draft. But it was honest. And he had learned, the hard way and completely, that honest was the only material worth building with. There was also a woman. He was not ready to say much about that. Not to anyone except maybe his mother, who he would eventually tell in the kitchen with the yellow curtains over coffee she made too strong. Her name was Angela. She was an architect he'd met at a project walkthrough in the fall, and she was sharp and specific and said what she meant, and she had made him laugh, actually laugh from somewhere real, the first time they'd talked for more than 5 minutes. He was moving carefully. He had no interest in moving any other way. But the friendship was there, and it was genuine, and it was asking to become something more, quietly and without pressure, in the way of something that might actually last. He was not in a hurry. He was 43 years old, and he had learned the cost of building on ground he hadn't checked. He would check this ground with the full attention it deserved, and if it held, he would build slowly and well. That was all he knew how to do. It had cost him, this year, to remember that it was enough. It was enough. One evening in April, a year and 1 month after the airport, Miles came home from the office to find Danny sitting at the kitchen table with a notebook open and Jordan cross-legged on the floor with headphones around his neck, arguing about something that stopped when Miles came through the door. "What are you two debating?" he said. "Nothing," Jordan said immediately, which meant something. Danny looked at her notebook and then at her father. "We were talking about the trip," she said. "The World Cup trip, last year." Miles set his keys on the counter. "Okay." "Jordan thinks you should have said more at the airport, like confronted her in front of everyone." Jordan pulled one knee up. "I didn't say in front of everyone, I just said something more than just walking away." Miles thought about that moment. The terminal. The announcement 2 gates down. The man in the Nike shirt who looked over and then found something else to look at. His daughter, with her carry-on, braced. "What would more have gotten me?" he said. Jordan thought about it. "I don't know. Satisfaction, maybe." "Satisfaction for 5 minutes," Miles said. "And then what? She knows everything I know? She has time to prepare? You two are standing in an airport watching your parents fight?" He got a glass from the cabinet and filled it with water. Walking away wasn't giving up. It was choosing where to spend the energy. Danny was watching him the way she always watched him when he said something she was deciding whether to file under true or complicated. "Did it feel like giving up?" she said. "When you did it?" He thought about the truth of that. He owed her the truth of it. "For about 30 seconds, he said. And then it felt like the only thing that made sense. Danny nodded slowly. "I thought so," she said. Not like she was being confirmed, like she had tested the proposition against what she knew and found it solid. Jordan was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'm glad we're still in the house." "Me too," Miles said. "And I'm glad we went to the fan zone thing in December. That was better anyway. Because Dorothy came." Miles thought about his mother in a folding chair explaining to a vendor why she needed to sit down. Thought about Jordan turning around in the crowd to check that he was still there. Thought about the fence in the backyard, painted white, holding. "Yeah," he said. "That was better." He made dinner. Thursday chicken and rice, which had migrated over the course of the year from its assigned night to a more general comfort food status, appearing whenever the week had been hard or good or simply needed marking. The 3 of them ate at the kitchen table, and Jordan talked about a kid from soccer camp who was apparently now his best friend, and Danny complained about a teacher in a way that was really about the assignment being insufficiently challenging. And Miles pointed that out, and she told him to stay in his lane, which made Jordan laugh so hard he nearly knocked over his glass. Miles caught the glass. He looked at the 2 of them, his 14-year-old with her precise eyes and her full commitment hugs, his 11-year-old who checked over his shoulder in crowds to make sure the people who mattered were still there. He thought about all the things they had seen this past year, the things they'd had to carry before they were ready, the things they'd told him without knowing the weight of what they were handing over. He thought about what it cost them and what it would keep costing them, in ways that wouldn't fully surface until they were older, and looking back at this year with the clarity that distance gave. He could not fix that. He could not undo what they'd witnessed or protect them from what was already in their memory. What he could do was be present and honest and steady, and keep making dinner on the nights that needed it, and drive them where they needed to go, and be standing in the crowd when they turned around to check. That was the job. It had always been the job. He had just needed to clear away enough of the wrong things to see it plainly. He looked at the table, at the food, at the 2 most important things he'd ever built. Not built exactly, but been part of, been trusted with, been changed by. And he thought about what his mother had said that Sunday in September, the question she'd asked that he'd been sitting with ever since. "Do you think part of you already knew?" He had worn the sweater for a long time. He knew that. He had chosen comfort over clarity in a marriage that deserved his full attention, and the cost of that choice had been real and lasting, and was not entirely someone else's fault. He was not going to be the man who blamed only outward, who made himself the clean victim of a story where everything bad came from elsewhere. He had played his part in the drift. The betrayal was not his. That was someone else's choice, made long before he understood what was happening. But the willingness to not look closely enough, to not test the ground, to keep adding floors to a structure he hadn't checked at the base, that was his. He owned that. He was done with it. He had a business that was growing into something he'd always believed it could be. He had 2 kids who were going to carry some damage into their adult lives, but were also, he believed this, had to believe it because it was true, going to be okay, genuinely okay, more than okay. He had his mother in Decatur with her yellow curtains and 2 strong coffee. He had Marcus and David and Kenny Briggs and Terrence, who had given him a wide berth through the worst of it and had simply been where they were supposed to be, which was the thing that mattered about people. And he had, somewhere in the cautious distance of a new and honest thing, the possibility of something that might build well if given the time it deserved. He was not going to rush it. He was not going to build on untested ground. He was going to look carefully, lay the foundation right, and raise walls only where the soil was true. He had always known how to do that. He just knew it differently now, in the specific, irreversible way of a man who had paid for the lesson in full and intended never to forget it. Jordan reached across the table for the last piece of bread and asked if he could have it, and Miles said yes, and Danny said she was going to have it, and Jordan said she should have taken it faster then, and it went from there into the ordinary noise of a household that was smaller than it used to be and still, improbably, full. Miles sat at the table and let the noise fill the room, and he did not reach for a sweater.